Serious, what is the strangest and most unexplainable thing you've experienced? Condensed version, I had a dream about hearing my, 6-year at the time, grandson's voice on the other side of a door. Later that day I mentioned it to my daughter, who said her son had woken her up in the night because he was dreaming about hearing me talking to him. He said he couldn't see me because as I was behind a door. Something about grandparents and grandkids. I always slept with my door shut and locked when I was younger and my parents. My sister had a room downstairs. One night I had a dream that my grandmother told me and my sister she was dying and it was time and we would be okay. I woke up. My light was on. My door wide open. I started walking into my kitchen where my sister was also walking and I said I just had the oddest dream. She said about grandma. We just looked at each other and the phone rang and my grandma had passed. Full disclosure, she was in the hospital dying from emphysema and it was sort of expected, so that definitely could have been the reason we both had this experience, but I still think about it and my sister and I never spoke of it again. I have two. I'm not sure if they'd count as unexplainable or strange, but I think about them quite often. The first didn't happen to me, but to a friend of my parents. My dad passed away last year January, almost a year to the date, and shortly after that a friend of his and my mom got badly infected with COVID. He lives in a different city about 6 hours away, so he sadly was not able to see my dad before he passed, nor could he attend the funeral. One evening he was really struggling to breathe, and everyone was really worried he wasn't going to pull through. The next morning he woke up and he was doing better. When his wife checked in on him, he cried and said my dad had visited him and told him everything would be fine, that he was going to be okay. The other incident was just before last Christmas. I'm a person who absolutely loves Christmas, and this last one being the first without my dad made me not look forward to it at all. One night when I was feeling particularly sad, I dreamt that my dad came to visit me. He said he only had a day in which to spend with me, and we did all the things we used to do together when I was little. Right before I woke up, I had a really emotional moment with him where I got to say goodbye. When I did wake up, it felt like the biggest weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I know it's all just our subconscious doing its thing, but I can't explain the feeling after those moments. When I was young, I was bullied at school and crying all days and night. One night I wanted to make it stop, and then I felt like a warm hug. It was amazing. I was alone in my room, and at this moment, it was like something or someone hugged me. It felt so real. It was the first and last time that happens, but it was special. Several years ago, some friends and I were driving through one of the millions of small towns around the North/South Carolina border in the mountains. It was well after midnight. My friend looks behind us and sees a pair of headlights coming up on us, quickly, like easily 60 to 70 miles per hour when the limit is 25 or so. No signs of stopping, so my friend pulls over to let the car pass. And what passes us is two lights. Just lights. Far too bright to be a firefly or any luminescent creature. As bright as headlights, if not brighter. Not attached to anything. No car. Nothing. Just two lights booking it down the road. I'll add my sweet one, but if there's interest, I have some scary ones too. When I was young, like 9 or 10, my favorite cat got hit and killed. He was black and white with the sweetest personality, and sadly didn't die right away. My parents wouldn't let me be there with him while he passed. My sister was allowed, so he wasn't alone. But he passed without me. 2 weeks later I woke up in the middle of the night to him laying on me like he always did. And when I realized, I sat up and watched him jump off the bed, walk into my closet and round the wall. I got up and went to look in the closet, just in time for him to walk into the wall and disappear. I miss that baby still, and I'm so happy he came to say goodbye. Edit. Okay. Scary time. I was 12 when I had my first job. 3 paper routes. And that meant waking up at 3 a.m. on weekends. On this particular weekend it was a little cold, but not very. And I had already done 2 of my routes. At this point in the morning, I'm at the little side streets heading for the main road, which has a house on each corner that needs a paper. So, I go to the house on the right and drop their paper off. And as I head to the house on the left, across the street, I look up into the tree and in there is a man staring back down at me with a noose around his neck. He's dressed in tattered colonial clothing. And I froze right there on the spot. I stared at him and he stared at me. And then I ran. I threw the paper at the house. Don't worry. It landed on the back porch, and booked it to my cousin's SUV. I never saw that ghost again, but I can still remember the cold look on his face with the fear in his eyes. Was driving down RT 94 in Callaway County, Mo, fairly close to the nuclear plant, and got pulled over for speeding. I mouthed off to the cop, because I was a dipshit college kid, and he made me get out of the car and do a field sobriety test in broad daylight even though I was stone sober. All of a sudden we heard what I initially thought was the nuclear plant exploding several miles away, but was probably a sonic boom. Looked up and saw what looked like a generic airplane, other than it being black, which seems uncommon, flying in a very unnatural way at what appeared to be regular airliner altitude, but could have been lower or higher depending on the size, I guess. It changed direction so abruptly that it would have been 100 plus Gs at regular airplane speeds, It appeared to be going fast as fuck. It changed directions like this multiple times. Like 45+ degree changes and heading almost instantaneously. Hard to describe how impossible/otherworldly it looked, zigzagging away. Heard the cop say what the fuck is that under his breath several times, and we just stood there and watched it until it got low enough that it was behind some trees. Cop was extremely shaken up and told me to get back in the car and slow down. Ever since then I firmly believe aliens exist, and even more firmly believe that they 100% got me out of a speeding ticket for 15 miles per hour over. Thanks aliens. 3 years ago, I had a bizarre dream involving me and my grandpa. In that dream, we're sitting at a park that I don't recognize. The weather was good and the atmosphere was relaxing. We talked about some stuff, which I forgot what about. Then suddenly, the sky darkened. I looked up to see what's going on and I saw a group of extremely huge bird-like creatures flying toward us. Other people in the park seemed to not notice anything. My grandpa was also looking at the sky, so I asked him what's going on and why only us could see them. What he said still chilled me to this day. He said, "Of course, only the dead can see them." I woke up all of a sudden with my heart pounding so hard and I was very sweaty despite the cold weather. I was unable to sleep anymore that night. The next day, I received the news that my grandpa passed away that night. I think that it's just all a big coincidence, but I can say that it's one of the most mysterious things that happened to me. This happened to me about 15 years ago. I live in Taiwan, working as an English teacher. I've lived in the same apartment for many years, and this took place a couple years after I moved in. For some reason, the air conditioning in my living room and my bedroom started to randomly turn on and off, as did the TV. At first, it was only once a day. Over the course of a couple of months, it slowly escalated to happening 3 or 4 times a day for the AC and a dozen times a day for the TV. I slowly got more and more annoyed with this, until I finally had enough. One day, after the TV had turned itself off 6 or 7 times in half an hour, I put down the remote, stood up quietly and just glared at the room, as though I were addressing a classroom full of rowdy kids. After half a minute, I said, first in Mandarin, then repeated in English, "Look, I don't mind you living here with me. I'm not scared of you, but I won't put up with this. Playing with my TV and air conditioning. If you keep doing it, I'm going to unplug everything, and you'll have nothing left to play with." From that day on, the TV and living room aircon never misbehaved again. The bedroom aircon only did it once more. Several years later, I had moved out to live with a girlfriend, big mistake, for 2 years. After breaking up, I got a lucky break in that the apartment was available again. So I moved back in. My first weekend, the bedroom aircon turned itself on once while I was sleeping, and never again after that. I think it was kind of a welcome back. There had been one time the girlfriend insisted on doing some apartment cleaning while I was out. She later told me that after I left, she felt like she was being glared at, and a door suddenly slammed when there was no wind to push it. After my brother passed, I inherited his old TV. I had never seen the TV before. I set it up in my bedroom, but it had an anti-thief code on it so it wouldn't tune to channels without having a 5-digit code. Weeks later I dreamt of my brother and he told me the code, which worked. I have lived in a town on the East Coast my whole life. It was a small town, and so everybody knew each other. My school holds around 400 students, so it's pretty small. We didn't regularly get new students, but this day in sophomore year we got 2. They were both girls, and were both sophomores, same as I at the time. I became friends with one of them. We'll call them Casey. About a year goes by. We are juniors now in our first semester. It was announced that there was a car crash in the neighborhood next to the city I lived in. The other transfer student that I was not friends with was the victim. It was announced later that day that she had died from her injuries. I wasn't very good friends with her, so it didn't affect me too much. At least not more than a low mood and condolences. What surprised was that no one else was upset. Not a single one of her friends, nor teachers, or parents. This is where the unexplainable part comes in. I went to my guidance counselor to talk about what had happened, because the fact that seemingly no one had cared bothered me. I asked him how he felt about the incident and he said that he hadn't heard the news, but was sorry I lost a friend. I told him we weren't close, but asked if he could look up her name for me. And he told me the girl I was asking for didn't exist in the school records, but found a student who shared her last name. The student? Casey. But Casey had walked into class the very next day like it was nothing. I still never understood what happened to the other transfer student, because there was no record of her wherever I searched. Still the craziest thing to ever happen to me. My family and I had been hearing things around the house for days. The next day a wedges packet turned up in the bin. We don't have wedges. That night I kept hearing voices in a part of the house next to the garden and behind the fragile fence. Check the next day. No one there. Me and my friend are driving through the mountains of Colorado at 4:30 a.m. to go skiing when we see a bright blue light streaking across the sky east to west. We just chalk it up to a large shooting star that was unusually bright. After a couple of seconds there's a sudden bright flash that lights up the sky, and the light now was traveling in a different trajectory about 90 degrees off of the original path and process to fly out of our view. I had a dream about 3 years ago running into a hospital room crying out, I'm here, I made it, I'm here, don't leave. I just got here, how did she pass so quickly? I thought this dream was about my mother. She was terminally ill with stage 4 cancer and I had been living out of state at the time doing an internship. Got a call the next day and it was my cousin telling me my grandmother had just passed away the day before. Not sure how, but basically she did exactly what I saw in my dream. She was driving from work to the hospital to see my grandmother and she passed moments before she got into her hospital room and said the same thing I was yelling in my dream. Super weird. Another one for you. When my mother finally passed, I was miserable. I asked her every day to give me a sign if I needed to go back home or stay in my internship. Well, one day I was at my breaking point running an errand for the business I worked at and in my head I was saying, fuck this. What am I doing? Mom, please give me a sign. I got hit by a car and knocked down into the median lane. I'm very fortunate no one was making a turn for the other direction of traffic or they would have ran over my head or leg-eyed. The car that hit me stopped in the median in front of me so you couldn't see me lying on the ground. Thankfully I was okay and went to the ER, but my boss at the time handled the whole thing super poorly. I got fired the same day after I was hit because I walked out and told him to put up the fucking Christmas tree himself, and I'm going to the ER to get an MRI to make sure I don't have a concussion. Obviously he was more worried about decorations than my health. When I talked to an attorney they said I could sue the business for not making a worker's claim because I was injured, but he's literally not worth the time. My grandma passed away rather young. After her funeral, family members kept telling my mom, your mom visited me last night, and it pissed my mom off. She was the favorite, so if anyone would have got a visit it would have been her. She was driving back from her aunt's house and asked out loud, Mom, if you really are visiting people, can you give me a sign at the next red light? The car in front of her had a custom license plate. It read Nedra, my grandmother's name. When I was young, 4-ish, I was somewhat sensitive. There was a prophetic dream I had of someone kneeling in the corner of the living/dining room that was normally covered by a cabinet. At this point of my life I had never seen that wall without anything in front of it. The man was wearing a red flannel shirt, jeans, and had that abstract dream-like blur. About 7 months later my parents had decided to replace the carpet, and scene for scene my father in the red flannel was explaining what replacing carpet was and why the cabinets were moved. Not something I experienced, but the one of many reasons why my parents, Hindu family, believe in the seers of our religion. We have lots of stories like this. This one stood out to me in particular. My dad's best friend growing up in India was always a cautious boy. The reason for this is because his parents consulted a seer to know their fate. The boy was told that he is destined to die young, by cause of water, and this fate is bound to his soul. In an attempt to circumvent this, the boy's parents had his name changed and ordered him to stay away from any forms of water. They thought this had ultimately changed his soul. Names are a pretty big deal in Hinduism. My dad and him had big plans then to leave India during college for greener pastures. They left for Germany and later the United States together. However, midway through college, my dad's friend had to return to India, family thing. My dad proceeded to America alone and had a family. He then had a business trip back to India and thought maybe I should visit my old friend. He went back and searched for his friend. The town elder said he died 20 years ago at age 22. The cause of death, drowning, trying to save a child caught in a flood. I think the child survived, so his sacrifice wasn't in vain. I can't explain how the seer saw this or even could know. The seer saw that this boy would die both young, dying at 20 is very young, and by water he drowned, both of which were correct predictions. I want to believe it's merely coincidence, but there's way more stories like this that my parents have. People say it's just coincidence, but story after story, I begin to wonder, could the old religions have been onto something? Not me, but a friend told me this story. He said that one night he woke up to get a drink of water, but then he looked outside and there was a black figure outside of his backyard lake. He goes outside to see who it is. The figure is still standing there, but when he got close to it, of a sudden all the frogs around the lake stopped croaking and my friend saw the figure slowly vanish. When the black figure vanished out of nowhere, all the frogs started croaking again. It freaked him out, say he ran back inside. He told me and my other friends that he didn't sleep at night and couldn't make up if he was dreaming or not. Pretty spooky. I used to live in Georgia when I was starting 6th grade. The bus stop I waited at usually had 4 to 5 kids there, but this one morning it was just me and Bubba. His nickname was Bubba. It was a real quite kind of foggy but just a really gray late fall morning. I said good morning when I got there, then stood side by side. We were both just staring into the wall of where the woods started across the road, and we were both quiet. After a few minutes I see this enormous bird fly out of nowhere. It was so large and black. I thought it was a vulture, but it was so fucking big from how far we were. It was just beyond the tree line into the woods, flying along it. It flew about 50 to 60 feet. More like hovered and only flapped its wings twice, but it was like watching a cartoon. It just disappeared as it flew behind a tree. I was just standing there for minutes after, like, WTF did I just witness? Did I just imagine that? Bubba breaks the silence and says, did you see that? Or am I crazy? I just exploded, like WTF? And we were like trying to discuss what just happened. I was young, but I wasn't stupid. I'm aware of how big birds can be. Even at that age I'd seen big birds before with huge wingspans. This was just freakish and cartoonish and didn't move right. I've tried to brush it off like maybe it was just a big black vulture, but everything about that event was just off, and I think about that a lot. I was new to Georgia, but Bubba grew up there. When I looked in his eyes I knew this was different. My older brother and I had the same exact dream. There was no way he could have made it up because I asked him to describe it first and he got every detail correct. My brother had muscular dystrophy and died at the age of 10 in our home. He of course had been wheelchair bound his entire life. Well, after his passing we moved into my grandmother's house because our house got foreclosed on due to my mother not being mentally stable enough for work. Well, one night after almost everything was moved into my grandmother's house, I came downstairs after playing video games to find that my mom left his motorized chair right in the kitchen with the lights off without my knowledge. Well, as soon as I turned the kitchen lights on there, he was sitting in the chair. He just smiled for a second then disappeared. I've never been able to explain it. I've had too many to recount them all. I'm not psychic or sensitive or anything. I just have seen a lot of weird shit happen. The first one, I was about 9. I was friends with a girl whose mom had moved houses several times because she was being chased by a ghost. They knew who it was. The first house they met it in had a tragic death. They called the ghost that dude's name. It had chased them across state lines. So I knew the story. Was at her house. She had a new puppy named Saskatoon. We were walking the pup around the block. Mom was out getting groceries or something. When we got back to the house, all the furniture had been moved. Like, couch blocking the door. Moved. My friend yelled at the ghost to put it back. We walked down the street and back. No one entered. No one left that house. All the furniture was back in place when we got back. The night my daughter was murdered, my phone was on silent across the room. My husband and I were laying in bed crying when my phone started taking pictures on its own. I said out loud, "It's okay, my daughter's name, go be at peace, we love you." The phone stopped making noise. I got up and checked it. There were 5 pictures and a video. They were all dark because my room was dark. The video was just a few seconds. With headphones I could hear a female voice, but it was probably just me crying. In life my daughter would pick up our phones if we set them down and weren't paying attention, and she'd take silly selfies or videos for us to find later. When I was younger, my mom had left for work and we lived in a shitty 2-bedroom apartment with a small kitchen. Well, one day, I went into the kitchen to get a snack and saw all of the cabinets and drawers wide open. The weirdest part is when I turned around after closing them. My mom was standing there behind me, but she was still at work. It still creeps me out to this day. Why were all the cabinets and drawers open? And why did I see my mom despite her still being at work? A man looking into the bedroom window just mere seconds after I was put in my cot and my mom went out of the room. It was on the top floor of our house, so my parents were still very much awake and around. So either this guy has 7-meter-long legs or a ladder that extends and collapses in seconds with zero noise, or he just casually flew up and looked inside straight at me with the most stern/angry looking face ever. It's my first real memory from when I was basically around 1 year old. And my mom says I was scared out of my mind and remembered it for weeks, which had never happened before or since.